You've found just stories, simple, heartfelt moments from real lives, stories that remind us how connected we all are through love, loss, and hope. Get cozy. The stories are about to begin. Eleanor shifted her shoulders impatiently and, releasing a heavy sigh, fixed her gaze on the window. However, the scene beyond the carriage glass brought no relief. On the grimy platform, where puddles of rain dully reflected the sky, the usual pre-departure bustle of a long-distance train was unfolding. In these moments, life seemed to pick up a frantic pace. Movements became jerky, faces joyfully startled, and the conductors, especially sharp and displeased. Their indignation, however, was quite understandable. Was it really so difficult for such respectable citizen passengers to arrive at the station in advance? To approach their carriage without rushing and take their designated seat? No. They absolutely had to rush to board at the very last second, only to then crowd together 10 deep, shouting, waving tickets, and simultaneously pushing their way through the narrow passage, which not everyone could even manage the height of on the first try. Look, there's a lady in a skirt that clearly restricts movement, puzzling over how to lift her leg onto the step without risking either her clothing or her reputation. It's laughably amusing. What an outfit to choose for a journey. And someone else who is yet to storm the carriage, in the last, most critical minutes, mercilessly late, is sprinting along the platform, losing bags, string bags, children, and their last strength as they go. Like, for instance, this gentleman, dragging 2 wheeled suitcases, with another enormous bag perched on top of each. It truly is astonishing how many things some people manage to take with them, like dung beetles or ants, capable of carrying loads many times their own weight. And it wouldn't be so bad if it were just things, but some people stock up on provisions as if it were their last chance to eat in their lives. Look at that short, plump auntie scuttling along, her arms spread wide, clutching a dozen baguettes between them. Apparently the lady is afraid she won't reach her destination and will simply starve to death along the way, although with her physique she could easily survive without food, let alone bread, for at least a year, which, by the way, would only do her good. Oh, and who is this striding along with such rare composure? Look at this fellow. Glasses on his nose, and in his hands a crossword puzzle book so large it's visible even from here. Well, I'll be an intellectual. He'll pretend to be a know-it-all the whole way, while secretly, every other word, peeking at the back of the magazine for the answer. And if you, sir, are so smart, why do you look at your ticket every 5 steps, and then lift your head to the carriage number plate? Surely your 2 or maybe even 3 diplomas don't help you simply remember the required number and find it calmly. Ah, that's it. The composure has vanished. He looked at his watch, realized he was late, and also sprinted along the platform like a goose. And someone, on the contrary, is frozen in place, fighting the urge to run away before the train even starts. These are, without a doubt, the farewell party. Look, for example, there's a fussy, thin uncle hovering, who just now, straining himself, helped a rather unpleasant lady, about 3 times his size, into the carriage. The lady gave him a very eloquent, menacing look as a parting gift, and even, for added conviction, poked a fist under his nose. The man's face shows clear relief and joy, which he is very clumsily masking with feigned sorrow. He's probably gotten rid of his dearest spouse, at least for a while, and is trying not to break into a dance right here on the platform out of happiness. And here's another type of farewell party, the romantic kind, so to speak. A girl, thin, pale, with smudged lipstick and clear streaks of mascara on her cheeks. What do we have here? A real drama. I wonder who she's seeing off. Ah, that guy over there. There he is, sticking out of the carriage door, and the conductor, far from romantic, is apparently trying to shove him back in. Well, I'll be. They seem to be lovers. How wonderful, if you ignore the fact that the guy is clearly pleased. Look how happily he's waving his arms, he almost fell off the step. And the girl, on the contrary, is all sadness. Obviously, she feels that nothing good will come of this parting for her personally. Yes, my dear, yes. Your boy will leave for the capital now, and you'll never see him again. Eleanor suddenly came to her senses and listened to her own thoughts with astonishment. What was wrong with her? Where did all this bitterness come from? This malicious irony towards completely unfamiliar and innocent people? Why was she standing by the carriage window, practically spitting sparks of irritation? She had never been like this before. What ridiculous and, most importantly, spiteful thoughts were swirling in her head? After all, maybe it wasn't like that at all. Perhaps the person with the huge luggage is the father of a large family, and when calculated per person, it turns out to be just one bag or suitcase per person, which is perfectly normal. And so, instead of a junk carrier, a man appears who is simply bravely lugging everyone's belongings. Who does he have there? Maybe 5 children are waiting in the compartments, or rather, on the bunks. And the auntie with the baguettes is the mother of the family, and the loaves in her hands are just a couple of snacks. And the intelligent man with the crossword puzzle book is actually a brilliant person, an erudite. And not only does he not peek at the answers, but on the contrary, he creates these puzzles himself. And even with the farewell party, everything could be completely different. The guy and the girl really love each other, and she's crying not from suspicion and bad premonitions, but from parting. And he's just a cheerful person who expresses his sadness by smiling. He went away on business, and when he returns, they will get married, and everything will be very good for them. And the lady in the tight skirt is great. She waved her hand, smiled shyly, and pulling her fabric higher, climbed into the carriage, incidentally causing a wave of joyful approval from both the farewell party and the men waiting to board. Indeed, traveling by train is no reason to dress in shapeless, ugly clothes. A woman should always remain a woman if her soul demands makeup, a skirt, and heels. A long-distance carriage is no hindrance to this at all. And even this skinny uncle, maybe he's just happy because he managed to shove his immense wife into the carriage because she could easily not fit through the door. Although no, with this man, her initial suspicions are most likely correct. He's just too impatiently shuffling his feet. He clearly has more interesting plans and doesn't want to waste a single minute of his free time. Feeling herself being carried away again, and the smile that had appeared on her face once again creeping into a sarcastic smirk, Eleanor moved away from the window. No, it really wasn't normal that she was so irritated. She needed to get a grip on herself somehow and not turn into a wicked shrew. She went into the compartment and sat down in her seat. The reason for this bilious outburst was, in principle, understandable. Eleanor couldn't stand trains and everything associated with them. The very thought that instead of 4 hours of dozing in an airplane seat, she would have to spend 3 nights and 2 days in a train carriage, constantly getting up, sitting down, even lying down, if, of course, she dared to do so, simply tormented her. She had never in her life spent so much time on a train. Such a long journey frankly terrified her, and she couldn't shake off the ridiculous and foolish but obsessive thought that, getting into the carriage as a relatively young woman, she would crawl out of it as a gray-haired and trembling old woman. The long train journey was forced, the only way to return home in the near future. Eleanor Smith, a financial auditor for a large company, was on a business trip to one of the holding's most remote enterprises. The deadlines for the audit, initiated by the firm's management, were indefinite, and Eleanor hadn't booked a return ticket, believing it was never too late to do so. Imagine her astonishment when, instead of the usual ticket form, she was handed some kind of voucher. "What is this?" she asked, surprised. "It's a train ticket," the girl from the factory secretariat cheerfully informed her. "You know what?" Eleanor exclaimed, indignant. "You must be joking. Hand this nonsense back. I'm not going by train." "Well, that's fine," the cheeky girl nodded. "In that case, Ms. Eleanor, you'll be staying with us for a long time. Well, at least for another month. Understand?" The girl, seeing that Eleanor was boiling, decided to explain herself anyway. "This isn't the capital, you know. There are only 2 flights a week, and tickets for them are bought up a month, or even 2, in advance. Especially now, in the middle of vacation season. So what? Why should that concern me? Your job is to provide me with a ticket, so be kind enough to provide one. And I don't care how you do it. I need to fly out the day after tomorrow, or at the very latest in 2 days. I need to be there by Wednesday. And that's fine. I've done my job. I've provided you with a ticket. You'll leave by train tomorrow and be there on Wednesday. The girl, judging by her demeanor, was very self-assured and looked at Eleanor quite defiantly. It became clear that arguing further was simply pointless. Eleanor snatched the ticket from the girl's fingers and picked up her phone. "Hello? This is the airline ticket office," she said into the receiver. "I need a ticket for tomorrow's flight." "You know, so do I," a voice replied from the receiver. "Outrageous," Eleanor articulated clearly to the giggling interlocutor and hung up. She simply couldn't stand train journeys. All this road romance, the groves and fields flashing past the window, the wires and poles racing alongside the carriage, none of it brought her any joy. She didn't feel tears of tenderness at the beauty and vastness of the Russian landscapes, and she didn't feel like reciting poetry. On the contrary, the flashing of the tree trunks quickly started a slight nausea. The rhythmic clatter of the carriage wheels, which many found soothing, irritated her instead. The food, which, again, many passengers actively used to brighten a long journey, stuck in Eleanor's throat, causing sensations similar to those caused by the flickering outside the window. She could only sleep normally under 3 mandatory conditions: complete darkness, complete silence, and complete stillness. It's not hard to guess that with such demands, there was no question of Eleanor sleeping on a train. How could anyone sleep when everything around you is shaking, creaking, rattling, flashing with light, and talking in different voices? Oh, and here's the most important thing: the notorious carriage conversation, which is somehow considered mandatory, as if the fact that people suddenly find themselves in a confined space makes them almost relatives and like-minded souls on matters of raising children, growing flowers, the terrible quality of products in stores, and real estate prices, which are simply outrageous and keep soaring. And if someone doesn't want to participate in these discussions, they immediately become an unpleasant person to everyone and generally quite suspicious. Such outcasts are given pointed looks, and eventually the person with no interests is forced to shamefully leave the compartment so as not to disturb normal people discussing vital topics. In short, the entire carriage environment was deeply unpleasant to Eleanor. "All right, never mind. I'll just sit for as long as I can. I'll think about my own things, maybe read, nap. In short, I'll survive somehow." She finally resigned herself to the inevitable, listening to the very wheels that were now clattering over the tracks as the train started moving. The women in the compartment seemed normal. At least for now, they're keeping quiet and not taking cutlets out of their bags. And then her resignation was once again endangered. What danger? Simply ruthless destruction. "Oh, my dear, I see you have the Amateur Gardener magazine. Are you into tomatoes, are you? Oh, wonderful. Tell me, darling, have you tried planting the Moscow Ultra Early tomato?" came the words of the lower bunk neighbor, addressed to another passenger. A lively elderly woman looked with pleasure at the younger, more sprightly lady. At least the upper bunk didn't bother her at all. "Oh, wait!" The owner of the upper bunk nimbly hopped down and stared at the old woman with admiration. "What did you say?" "No, I don't even know that one. I always plant the Ural variety. It's also early." "Oh, that's the last century," declared authoritatively the native of, at least, the first half of that very last century, and even closer to its beginning. "There's a wonderful variety, the early Moscow one. You absolutely must try it. It's absolutely stunning. I plant it directly in open ground in May, and most importantly, it doesn't need pinching at all." "You don't say, really?" her interlocutor exclaimed in surprise, and even pressed her hands together in silent rapture. "Yes, yes, and the tops are so wonderful, fragrant, so bright. It's a pity you can't give them to piglets, but mine happily eat carrot tops too, although some smart Alecs also say, you can't." The elderly woman continued to unfold the picture of her hobbies before her admiring interlocutor. "Oh, yes, you shouldn't listen to just anyone. They don't understand much," the other woman actively agreed. "Nothing will happen. By the way, I myself love fresh tops, in a salad, in soup, and you can just chew on them. Oh, and do you know how much they help with joints?" "Yes?" The specialist in growing non-pinched tomatoes became interested. Aha, the lover of greens exclaimed. So this is how it is. You take a couple of fluffy carrot tops, chop them, brew them with boiling water, and then… Eleanor slid off her seat and, feeling pitying glances on her back, left the compartment. The day was drawing to a close. The sun, hanging exactly on the side Eleanor was looking at from the carriage window, had dipped towards the horizon and was flooding everything with a pinkish golden light, casting reflections on the glass. It was very beautiful, and even a nature as thick-skinned as Eleanor Smith felt this beauty. As her mother used to say about her jokingly, when romanticism and enthusiasm were being handed out, our Ellie was pushing her way to the front rows in the queue for intelligence and perseverance, her mother would chuckle, hinting at her daughter's not-so-girlish character. Eleanor did indeed very rarely admire landscapes, still lifes, and other picturesque combinations. But this time, perhaps because there was nothing else to do, and for the first time in many days, or maybe even years, she was simply standing idle, and without any particular thoughts, she sincerely admired the summer sunset, piercing the entire space between the horizon and the moving carriage with crimson golden rays. Beautiful, Eleanor breathed out in admiration, and, it turned out, did so aloud, because a similar sigh sounded next to her, as if in response, and a male voice. Indeed, Miss Eleanor, very beautiful, though I never imagined you paid attention to such things. Eleanor started in surprise and didn't even immediately realize she had been addressed by her full name, and when she suddenly recognized the voice, she just shook her head. If there was anything she lacked to finally and irrevocably hate carriage life, it was precisely the presence of this man here. Honestly, she would rather have stayed in her compartment, listened to her neighbors' gossip, and, who knows, she might have become imbued with the ideas of folk medicine and gardening values. In any case, her chances of that were higher than of having a normal conversation with the man who had suddenly ruined her enjoyment of the sunset. She raised her head and squinted. Well, I'll be, Cyril, she exclaimed, rather unskillfully feigning joy. What a pleasant surprise, is that you? Yep, it's me, he confirmed, also joyfully. But unlike her, he seemed sincere. Imagine, what an unexpected meeting. And there I am, standing, looking, and I can't believe my eyes. I even rubbed them. Good heavens, I think, it's none other than Eleanor Smith herself. It's Eleanor, not Eleanor, she hissed through clenched teeth. I've told you 1,000 times, don't mutilate my name with some silly village accent. Save your dashing simplicity for gullible girls. Oh, now don't be offended, I didn't come up with it. That's what they called you at the factory. Our, shall we say, Eleanor the craftswoman. You certainly wove some intricate lace there in 2 weeks. So intricate. Now the whole management team is sitting around trying to figure out how to untangle it. He spoke with a serious expression, but his eyes were openly laughing. You're all lying, Eleanor suddenly declared. As if I don't know that all the stupid and, by the way, not at all funny jokes going around the factory are your handiwork. In short, all this nastiness comes from you. And as for the business, you know, you shouldn't have complicated things, that is, let things get so out of hand. Then the whole management team wouldn't have to be sitting around now. By the way, maybe someone else will end up sitting too. Well, in the literal sense, truly. For negligence in reporting, Eleanor flared up. And personally, if I were you, my dear Cyril, I wouldn't be so calm and self-assured. After all, the chief engineer isn't the least important person at the factory. So, in short, I don't wish to speak with you, especially on such topics. And generally I find it unpleasant to see you. The thought that this pleasure will last 2 days makes me shudder. So, on the contrary, this is a hellishly unpleasant nuisance. That's all. I wish you success. She turned her back on the man and darted towards her compartment, and suddenly stopped, as if she had run into an invisible wall and couldn't believe her ears. Behind her there was a quiet laugh. She turned around in astonishment. He was indeed laughing. And suddenly Eleanor caught herself thinking that she hadn't seen anything more attractive in a long time, unless, of course, you counted today's sunset. Despite all his repulsive manner, his strange sense of humor, and his monstrous, inexplicably based self-confidence, he, Cyril Johnson, was handsome, just handsome, and that was that. And denying it was as foolish as claiming that the sun was rising at this moment, not setting. Now, when he wasn't dressed in a grubby work suit, his cheeks were cleanly shaven, and there wasn't a usual smeared spot of machine oil on his forehead or nose, it was especially noticeable. His rather fine, regular features didn't make his face effeminate. On the contrary, it was 100% masculinity, just handsome. But the main adornment of his face was his eyes, light gray, clear, framed by dark eyelashes. Combined with his dark hair, high forehead, white teeth, and excellent physique, it was all quite striking. And the most amazing thing was that the owner of all this external wealth was completely natural and seemed to be saying to everyone around him with his whole appearance, "Well, yes, I'm handsome, I know, but it's not my fault I was born this way. Although, to be honest, I'm not complaining. If I've offended anyone by this, I apologize, but generally it's nonsense. So, what were we going to talk about?" But despite all his attractiveness, Eleanor couldn't stand him. She had gotten to know Johnson quite well during the 2 weeks she spent at the factory. She acknowledged his merits, at least some of them, and, it must be said, she even owed him her life in the literal sense of the word. And yet, she couldn't help herself. He was deeply antipathetic to her. But sometimes it happens that people are simply unpleasant to each other for no objective reason, without explanation, on the level of feelings and emotions. That was exactly how it was for her, for Eleanor, towards the factory's chief engineer, Johnson. And it seemed the antipathy was mutual. At least he never missed an opportunity to needle her, often quite painfully. In short, her relationship with Johnson was difficult and not particularly pleasant. And this was all the more terrible because he was, without a doubt, interesting, handsome, brave, decisive, intelligent. And there was something else, something that she couldn't articulate, but only vaguely felt. And this something was unsettling, interfering with her life. Because of this, she was even angrier at Johnson. Because of all this, he was even more repulsive. "He's like some kind of nastiness in a tempting, beautiful package," she thought angrily, flopping down in her seat and startling her neighbors, who even interrupted their discussion of composting or mulching methods. For Eleanor, however, it was all the same. "What's wrong, dear?" the older woman asked, looking at Eleanor with concern. "You have spots all over your face. Wait, I'll pour you some chamomile tea from my thermos with honey. It's very calming. Maybe you need something else?" "Yes, I do," Eleanor nodded. "Like, could you help me throw someone out of the carriage? He's just hanging around, you see, some failed Alain Delon." "Oh, are you talking about Cy?" The old woman suddenly reacted, completely unexpectedly. "And yes, it's true. He does look like Fanfan La Tulipe, only older. Yes, a bit stockier, a bit more substantial. And how did I not realize it myself?" "About Cy?" Eleanor repeated, astonished. "Do you know him?" "Well, how do I know him?" the woman smiled. "We met at the station while he was helping me out. You see, oh, we haven't even introduced ourselves yet, and we're traveling together for 2 days. What are your names, dears?" "Eleanor," she mumbled, trying to put on a pleasant expression. It's easy to be silent when you don't know anyone, as if you're not obliged to socialize. But now, you must. An acquaintance has been made, and a compartment acquaintance is almost family, at least for the duration of the journey. "Ellie, wonderful. My name is Agnes Miller, and this is Brenda." The old woman nodded towards her tomato-minded friend. "Well, so who were we talking about? Ah, about Cyril." Her face broke into a smile. "He helped me so much with my suitcase, bless him. He dragged it and me along to the carriage, shoved us in, so thanks to him I'm traveling. Otherwise, I'd still be sitting on my bag in the station square." "Big deal, a savior. Just a normal manly act," Eleanor grumbled. "He's still a boor." "Sigh, a boor?" Agnes Miller exclaimed in surprise. "What are you saying, Ellie? He's a wonderful person." "Oh? How long have you known him? A couple of hours. And I've had that pleasure for 2 weeks now, so I know better, Eleanor declared. Oh, Ellie, does it really take time for that? You can tell such people at first glance with your heart. He's a wonderful person, Agnes said. All right, Agnes Miller. I won't argue with you. Eleanor waved her hand and lay down on her bunk. Well, I'll be. What a cherub, a savior of old women, a Siberian fan-fan. And he's not fan-fan by birth, he's a braggart. Oh, forget him altogether, as if she had nothing else to worry about. She herself, by the way, has God knows what going on in her life. But deciding not to think about Johnson was much easier than actually not doing so. Her thoughts returned again and again to this man, who was completely unlike anyone she had met in her 35 years of life, and who suddenly, by some strange whim of fate, was right next door, literally behind the thin partition of the compartment. At the factory, located in a small Siberian town 3,000 kilometers from the capital, Eleanor found herself at the order of the head of their enormous holding, which united more than one such enterprise under its wing. Arthur Davies was Eleanor's patron, both literally and figuratively. He was an old friend of the Smith family, friends with Eleanor's father, and, as family legends had it, had honestly and openly tried to win the girl away from his friend. But the girl preferred Robert Smith, became his wife, gave birth to their daughter Eleanor, and Arthur, in his own words, remained forever inconsolable, in love, standing before the newlyweds as a perpetual reproach. However, Catherine always laughed heartily when recalling this story. Oh, yes, Artie, I remember how long and violently you grieved. About 2 days, she would nod, and then went to the cinema with your Ginny. So don't talk nonsense, or people will think we had a love triangle. Despite such details, the trio remained friends throughout their lives, and after burying his suddenly departed friend, Arthur seemed to take responsibility for Catherine and 10-year-old Eleanor, and was very happy when Eleanor, finishing school, having outgrown her girlish dreams of a film career, modeling, or sports fame, seriously considered finance as her future profession. That's right, Ellie, the by then solid, authoritative, and very wealthy businessman would say. You go study, and then come work for me. We've got things unfolding now. You know, I need my own people, especially in these financial matters, where the devil himself would break his leg. Eleanor graduated from university and, of course, came to work for the very holding where Arthur Davies was one of the founders, directors, shareholders, in short, the most important person. Well, everyone will say that you hired me just because I'm a Smith, your friend's daughter, she doubted. And why can't I hire you because of that? Arthur asked, surprised. Especially since you're like a daughter to me, too. Well, Ellie, don't bother your head with nonsense. Start working. And if it turns out I was wrong about you, well, I'll fire you, regardless of your surname. That's how we'll fix your reputation. But the old businessman was not mistaken. Eleanor turned out to be an excellent financier, and each year of work only added to her experience, foresight, and intuition. After several years, she became the company's chief economist auditor, spending a significant part of her time traveling to numerous enterprises, firms, factories, plants, and combines, assessing the correctness of accounting and the efficiency of production. Ms. Eleanor, my dear. Arthur always addressed her with this strange phrase when a difficult conversation was ahead. We have, or rather, you have a little trip coming up, you see. We need to thoroughly check our factory in Ennesk. Things have gone quite badly there. In Ennesk? Eleanor asked, surprised. Hasn't it been closed down yet? It seemed they were planning to. The profits there are next to nothing. The costs are enormous. Before making such a decision definitively, we need to go, study the situation thoroughly, estimate how much needs to be invested there, and if it's worth it. So you go. Arthur suddenly became animated. You know, my good acquaintance Cyril Johnson has been working there as the chief engineer for about 10 years. He's quite a man, and you take a closer look at him there. What? In what sense? Eleanor flared up. In that very sense, the man nodded with a smile. Arthur Davies, you're completely... I dare remind you, I am married. Oh, come on, Ellie, what marriage? Forgive me, old fool that I am, for meddling in your affairs. I just can't bear to watch you suffer and waste your life on a man who never deserved you. All right, that's enough. Forgive me. You're a big girl. You'll sort out your own affairs. As for the factory, I repeat, I will only agree to liquidate it if everything is completely hopeless there. Well, Ellie, it's my hometown. People there don't have many other places to work. I wouldn't want to deprive them of their last resort, and the people there are wonderful. So, inwardly grumbling at her boss for his unexpected sentimentality, Eleanor found herself in the far reaches at an old, dilapidated factory that, from her point of view, was pointlessly clinging to life. On the very first day of her business trip, she was convinced that all her suspicions were correct. Everything here was bad, very bad, even worse. The equipment was old, the machines rattled like a pile of scrap metal, and the financial statements were simply appalling with errors, miscalculations, and outright blunders. Who Arthur had so admired here, speaking of wonderful people, she frankly didn't understand. She met the chief engineer, that very man, under rather scandalous circumstances, such that she herself was, frankly, a little ashamed to recall the encounter. For a couple of days, she sat in the accounting department, rummaging through reports, frowning angrily, maintaining a significant and tragic silence, frightening the poor chief accountant with her appearance, and finally said, "All right, well, this is all clear to me. I need to talk to the management of all this." She gestured with her hand at an imaginary figure, meaning the messy factory. "But, Ms. Eleanor, the director and his deputy will be here tomorrow. The only management on duty now is Johnson. He's our chief engineer." Suddenly, the lady perked up as if she felt a surge of energy. "It would even be better for you to talk to Cyril. You have many questions about the equipment." "Yes, very many," Eleanor smirked. "Where is this chief engineer's office of yours?" "His office is nearby, the next one down the corridor. But he's not there. He's hardly ever in his office," the chief accountant replied. "And generally, does anyone from management here actually come to work? Just for a change?" Eleanor snapped, annoyed. "Oh, what are you saying? You misunderstood. He is at work," the woman rattled on. "He just doesn't sit in his office. He's mostly in the workshops. You go straight there, they'll show you. Only, Ms. Eleanor, you should change your shoes. It's not very clean in there. It's a production facility after all." "It's not just not very clean here," Eleanor mimicked the chief accountant, getting up decisively. "It's outright dirt everywhere, literally and figuratively. Now where is your unfortunate chief engineer?" Eleanor shouted irritably, trying to be heard over the noise of the machines and prevent her safety helmet from slipping onto her nose. She really should have listened to that funny, naive woman from accounting and changed her shoes. But now it was too late, and an oily stain of some nastiness had spread on her wonderful suede shoe. In her annoyance, she was ready to immediately grab the throat of this damned chief engineer, because of whom she was trudging through the dirty workshop. "Why unfortunate?" a voice said from somewhere around her knees. She jumped back in fright. A dirty man in a work suit, with hands so smeared they looked alien and just attached to his sleeves, was crawling out from under a stationary line. "Why unfortunate?" he continued in a slightly hoarse voice. "Quite happy with life, actually. And if I manage to catch the hockey match broadcast in the evening, I'll be completely happy." Eleanor stared at the talking worker in astonishment. No, this wasn't a factory, it was some kind of circus. A sideshow. "Listen, you," she frowned. "I am, of course, impressed by your knowledge of your boss's affairs, but just tell me where he is. Where is this so-called chief engineer of yours?" "Again, you are mistaken," the strange worker mumbled. "He is not so-called, but quite real." "That's it. I've had enough," Eleanor snapped, angry. "This is a real madhouse. Either you tell me immediately where your Johnson is, or I—" "No need for anything. I'm here," the dirty man in the work suit suddenly said. "Forgive my appearance, but allow me to introduce myself. Johnson, Cyril." "Ah, and why?" She struggled to find words, but quickly recovered and almost shouted, "Why are you here and looking like this? Do you have nothing better to do? What is going on here? Are you a manager or what? How can anyone take you seriously? This is why everything here is in such a state, because you, the chief engineer of the factory, instead of controlling business processes, organizing, coordinating work, are sitting under some piece of metal and tightening nuts. You see, my dear woman, if I don't immediately tighten this nut on this piece of metal right now, I'm afraid there will be nothing to organize and coordinate, and nothing to manage either. The business process will collapse, the man replied sadly. But she had a distinct feeling that he was laughing inside. His eyes gave him away, large, light gray, shining on that grimy face like two precious stones of very pure and high quality. "And what is this, my dear woman?" she retorted. "I am not your dear, and I am not a woman." "Yes," Johnson said, surprised. "Well, I can agree with the first part. It's too early to call you dear. But what about the second? What are you, if not a woman?" And again, that clear, sly, good-natured mockery, and the faces around, smiling for no reason instead of working. Probably those very wonderful people, in Arthur's opinion. Eleanor closed her eyes and tried to remember something from the numerous training courses she had taken on effective interaction with personnel. But nothing suitable came to mind, so she just broke into a scandalous rant, squeaking the ends of her words. "That's it. Enough. I'm tired of it. Remember, my name is Eleanor Smith, and I have come for a comprehensive audit of your enterprise. And I have the broadest powers, up to and including completely shutting down your shoddy operation. In 20 minutes, I expect you, Mr. Johnson, in the director's office with documentation for all the equipment and clear explanations for the ineffective use of the fixed assets and assets entrusted to you." "I can't make it in 20 minutes. Let's say in 40, Johnson said calmly. "Ms. Eleanor, don't take this as disrespect for your broadest powers, but I absolutely must get this fixed asset entrusted to me up and running, and I also need to wash my assets." To the laughter of the now quite numerous crowd, he extended his dirty hands towards her, covered in grime that seemed to be ingrained forever. Eleanor suddenly realized that if she wanted to save face, or rather what was left of it, she had better keep quiet. She snorted, lifted her nose, turned sharply on the spot, and nearly fell flat on the floor because her heel broke. Oh dear, who runs around a factory in shoes like that? Is it unprofitable?" She heard the quiet, hoarse voice and finally hated its owner completely. "Oaf, lout, brute," she muttered, hobbling on her uneven heels towards the factory office. "Probably became a boss purely by chance, just because there was no one else to appoint in this hole. All he can do is tinker with metal, and yet a wit. Well, never mind. I'll arrange a satire and humor competition for you." Exactly 40 minutes later, a short, broad-shouldered man entered the director's office, nodded gravely, and sat down at the desk. Eleanor noted his solid movements, excellent suit, neatly combed hair out of the corner of her eye. Well, thank God, at least someone is sane, at least dressed normally, not acting silly, Eleanor thought, quickly finishing her sentence, raised her head, and stared in astonishment at Johnson himself. "You," she raised her eyebrows, trying to pretend she wasn't surprised by his appearance. "Well, that's completely different. It turns out you can look quite decent." "I can," he nodded with a sigh. "Though it rarely happens. Mostly I have to run around the workshop with a wrench, repairing fixed assets." "Precisely. Why are you running around? That's the duty of a repair fitter, an adjuster, or whatever he's called on your staff list. He should be dealing with the equipment." "I completely agree with you, Ms. Eleanor. Only we have a staff list, a beautiful large one. You read it and your soul rejoices. But there are no repair fitters. That's the snag." He nodded seriously. "Firstly, I am not Eleanor. I am Eleanor. Eleanor Smith," she enunciated. "And secondly, why don't you have fitters?" "Well, probably for the same reason we don't have turners, millers, general laborers, and many other things. We pay little, so people don't come to us. Enterprises that make a profit pay serious wages. That's a simple truth, and you, as a manager, a leader, should know this and explain it to your subordinates," Eleanor said proudly. "I know, Ms. Eleanor, and I completely agree with you. That's what I tell Tom, my last adjuster, every day first thing in the morning. 'Tom, look, Wait, and as soon as profit starts pouring in, you'll immediately get a serious wage." Johnson looked at her without the slightest hint of a smile. She sighed deeply. Terrible man. Although he does look, of course. Yes, he looks. Right. What was she thinking about? Stop calling me Eleanor. I am Eleanor. Now let's talk specifically about your affairs. I've looked at the reports on the cost of maintaining and operating the equipment. My hair stood on end. What profit can we talk about when, with terrible expenses, the utilization rate of your machines and lines is below 40%? Are you completely... What? Can you explain this to me as the chief engineer? I can, he nodded. But for fairness, let's first rename me the chief antiquarian keeper of old things, because half of our equipment only exists in these papers now. He pushed several folders towards her. And what's left, thank God, works at the percentages you mentioned, respected Ms. Eleanor, with God's help and ours. And yes, you are not Eleanor, I remember. Listen, Johnson, let's talk seriously, she said after a pause. You understand that with the current state of affairs, it is more profitable for the holdings management to close the factory than to invest huge sums in it. Well, yes, of course it's more profitable, and there's no need to think about the 1,000 people who will be left without work. And do you know that we have 9 dynasties of hereditary factory masters? And the fact that we still make the best quality products on our old junk, there's little of it, but it's the best. He waved his hand. Well, all right, wait. Let's say you have excellent masters in production, but the specialists, they're completely useless. I spent 2 days checking the accounting entries and reports. You're Susan Brown. Her knowledge is that of a technical college graduate, and she's the chief accountant. And Susan is a technical college graduate, and even if she lacks something, she is an honest person and works for 3. Johnson frowned. You know, Ms. Eleanor, I've been working here for 10 years, and in my time, not a single girl from the capital in suede shoes has ever come here to work. So, you see, we might have had a great chief accountant. Yes, it's easy for you to say. You were born here, you live here, probably your whole life. Do you think it's easy to just pick up and move to this backwater? And by the way, I've always wanted to ask you, where did you get your Moscow diploma? She suddenly asked. By chance, Ms. Eleanor, just like the position of chief engineer. A pure misunderstanding, he smiled. Stop calling me Eleanor, Eleanor corrected him, now out of habit, more to catch her breath. All right, Cyril, you can go, thank you. You're welcome, not Ms. Eleanor, he said and left. Now, how can you have a normal conversation with a person like that? Oh, Ms. Eleanor, what do you mean local? Johnson, he's from your area, a native Muscovite. He studied there. Yes, yes, his parents still live there. He goes to visit them on vacation. The girl from the HR department was terribly flattered by the attention of the auditor from the capital, and especially by the fact that the lady was clearly inquiring about Johnson, confidentially, so to speak. You know, I of course don't know all the details and I don't like gossip, but Cyril is, well, just a romantic hero. He had some kind of personal tragedy there in Moscow, something terrible. That's why he moved here. And he lives here, well, just like a monk, can you imagine, with his looks? Arthur Davies. Eleanor mumbled into the phone, feeling embarrassed. Why is Johnson even sticking around here? Ah, interested? Cyril got to you. Arthur suddenly sounded pleased. In what way? What are you talking about? Eleanor exclaimed, indignant. It's just that he's, how can I put it, unusual perhaps. He has... Ellie, his life is in complete ruins. His wife was pregnant and died. It happened a long time ago, many years ago. Since then, he's been wandering the world alone. But luckily, he's suffering in the vicinity of our factory. Everything there depends solely on Cyril. Well, I think you've already figured that out yourself. Imagine it turns out this man has a lot of rather grim things behind him, and yet he sometimes acts like a stand-up comedian, she thought then. And a few days later, perhaps the most terrible episode of her life occurred. That day, she got caught up with documents and left the factory office when thick August twilight had already settled around. The hotel where Eleanor was staying during her business trip was located nearby, a couple of stops away, but it was late, and waiting for a bus seemed like a dubious undertaking. "I'll walk," Eleanor decided, remembering a shady alley shown to her by someone from the factory, which stretched through a semi-abandoned park, cutting off a decent portion of the path and leading directly to the hotel. After a whole day spent in a dusty office among piles of papers, Eleanor inhaled the refreshed evening air with pleasure and briskly walked along the tiled path. And suddenly, two figures emerged silently from the darkness, as if woven from the air. One quickly stepped onto the path in front of Eleanor, and the second, behind her back, cutting off her retreat. "All right," the one standing in front drawled in a low male voice. However, it was already clear that these were tall, stocky men. In the twilight, from the terror that gripped her whole body, they seemed simply enormous. Well, what a fairy, and quite something herself, and such a promising handbag. Right, Mick?" he continued. The one standing behind mumbled something indistinctly, clearly sharing the admiration for the woman and her handbag. "All right, lady, let's do this the easy way. If we agree, nothing will happen to you. Well, what do I mean nothing? Nothing too bad anyway. Gentleman's word." He laughed. "Listen, do you need money?" Eleanor finally managed to overcome the spasm in her throat. "I only have a card, but I'll tell you the code. Here, take it, please." She fumbled with trembling hands, trying to open her bag. "Of course, you'll tell us absolutely, but that's later. After," the man grinned. She couldn't see his face completely because of the dark hood pulled low over it, but she saw dark stubble, among which teeth gleamed in a horrifying grin. A real beast flashed through her mind. In reality, compared to this creature, which was called a human only by mistake, even the hungriest, angriest wolf in a dark forest would have seemed like a harmless puppy. And of course, she didn't believe his assurances that he wouldn't do anything too bad to her for a second. "I wonder how quickly they'll find me if they find me at all. And if they do, will there be anything left to send to Mom? So much for taking a shortcut, you unfortunate idiot," Eleanor suddenly thought, somewhat detachedly, almost calmly. Please don't touch me," she said in a trembling, breaking voice. "Oh, come now, madam. I am a well-mannered man. Did you notice I'm not even addressing you informally, but continue to respectfully call you you?" he chuckled. "As I said, I'm a gentleman." For some reason, after this phrase, Eleanor became especially frightened. If they had been simple ruffians, wild with drink and some other nastiness, there would have been hope of persuading them, bribing them, stalling for time, or finally just trying to break free and run away. But before her stood two strong, firmly planted scoundrels, from whom emanated waves of malice and cruelty. "Hear that, gentlemen?" She suddenly heard a quiet, firm voice. "Get out of the way. Let the person pass." Paralyzed by terror, she couldn't even turn to look at the unexpected fairy tale-like help. Truthfully, it wasn't necessary. The new character in this eerie scene appeared from somewhere to the side, and resolutely, ignoring the men who had become animated, moved Eleanor behind his back, pushing her towards the edge of the alley. "Oh, what a lucky day today, eh, Mick?" The one in the hood grinned. "Check out the jacket on the guy. You've wanted one like that for a long time, haven't you? Come on, guy, take off your jacket and scram. I have a date with the madam here." "Doesn't look like it," the unexpected protector chuckled, whose voice, to Eleanor, who had slightly emerged from her stupor, seemed familiar. "You don't have flowers, and the lady isn't throwing herself around your neck." Eleanor raised her head and fixed her gaze on the speaker's back. He was strong, but he was far from being a thug. He was shorter, smaller, and clearly weaker. "All right, a rival, eh?" The man in the hood snarled again like a beast. "And I don't tolerate rivals, I simply eliminate them in the literal sense." He slowly drew his hand from his pocket, and a blade gleamed brightly in his fist in the light. "All right, the evening is ceasing to be romantic," the man standing in front of Eleanor muttered. She squeezed her eyes shut in terror, and when she opened them, she blinked in astonishment. Still clutching the knife in his hand, the attacker, met with a move, fell to the ground with a look of surprise on his face, and lay still. The man stepped on the hand holding the knife, added a quick and precise blow to the head, and straightened up. It was Johnson. He quickly smiled at the astonished Eleanor and turned to the second thug. "You wanted my jacket?" Cyril grumbled. The guy mumbled something indistinctly and lunged forward, and a second later choked on a gurgle as he ran into a fist. Johnson's second fist landed on his head, and suddenly, perhaps because of the helpless expression that appeared on his face, he seemed like a boy to Eleanor, almost a child. "Oh, you'll kill him," Eleanor blurted out. "Why are you beating him?" She asked this almost with indignation, as if just a few minutes ago this very guy hadn't threatened her with a terrible fate. Johnson looked at Eleanor in surprise and shook his head, and she, having escaped danger, hating herself for it, instead of thanking him for saving her, suddenly said in a nasty voice, "By the way, brute force isn't always the best argument, and anyway, we need the police." Johnson nodded seriously and took his phone out of his pocket. "Station. Who?" "Captain Peterson." "Oh, Pete, hello." "Yeah, it's me." Johnson smiled broadly. "Pete, good to hear from you. When did you get back? They said you went to Baikal fishing." "Yes, I was there." "Ah, Pete, you're a pig, of course. You could have invited me." "All right. So, how about the ommel?" "What? What were you fishing with? A jig? Listen, have you tried—" Cyril stood there chatting on the phone as if he were sitting in an armchair at home, not standing in the middle of a dark alley with thugs lying 2 steps away and her, Eleanor, trembling and sobbing next to him, apparently having a delayed hysterical fit. "Oh, Pete, all right, tell me everything later in more detail. Why am I calling, Captain? I need you to send a patrol. We have 2 citizens relaxing here, one with a very sharp knife and a beautiful woman whom they scared badly. And also," he looked at Eleanor ironically and chuckled, "I need to be detained and questioned about exceeding the limits of self-defense. Why jokes, Pete, I mean, Captain. This citizen insists that I could have acted more gently somehow. Although, you know," he suddenly bent down, peering closely at the face of the man lying down, whose hood had slipped off. "It seems gentleness wouldn't have worked here. I have a feeling this is Vinny, your longtime ward. What's this, Pete, that he's wandering around free? How many times has he been out now? Oh, wonderful. How happy I am for him. Got out, and apparently went straight to the library, and grabbed a knife to carefully cut the stuck pages. You're something, Captain Pete. He's scaring people, and you're fishing on Baikal. All right, send them over. We'll wait on our old alley, right next to the former stand with former leading workers of the former production." "Can you ever be serious?" Eleanor asked him when he put his phone back in his pocket. "Ms. Eleanor, I am very serious, truly. And now that I've seen who exactly attacked you here, I'm even slightly scared, honestly. If I had known it was Vinny the recidivist, I wouldn't have gotten involved for anything. Well, you understand. Since it happened, please forgive me for beating him up. Don't file a police report against me. All right?" Johnson looked down with a guilty, contrite expression. You're a clown, you!" she burst out indignant. "You're ready to turn everything into a circus. I'm tired of repeating myself. I'm not Eleanor. I'm Eleanor. Eleanor, 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 Ellie, Ellie." Someone gently but noticeably shook her shoulder. "Ellie, dear, wake up. Get up. It's been morning for a while now. My, how you slept. You can tell right away this person loves traveling by train." Eleanor slowly opened her eyes. Agnes Miller and Brenda were sitting opposite her, smiling as if contemplating a sleepy and rumpled face with hair standing on end was the most pleasant thing imaginable. "Morning?" Eleanor asked, astonished. "Did I sleep through the whole night?" "And how?" the old woman laughed. "It was a joy to watch and listen." Eleanor looked at her reflection in a small mirror in astonishment. Wow, she had just laid down to think about life. She couldn't remember when her memories had turned into a sound and unusually long sleep. "Ellie, why did we decide to wake you up? Please don't be angry, dear, but we're having a guest come over now." Agnes Miller smiled. "So you should wash up and comb your hair, and we'll have breakfast." "A guest?" Eleanor exclaimed in surprise, and suddenly noticed that both her compartment neighbors were dressed in nice tracksuits, had clearly styled their hair as much as camping conditions allowed, and had even, believe it or not, put on lipstick. "Yes, I mean, Cyril," Agnes said. "Well, not exactly a guest, actually. He's coming to fix the lock for us because our compartment door is stuck. Brenda and I could barely get out this morning. We don't have such heroic sleep as you do, Ellie." Agnes laughed softly. "Fix the door." "Cyril," Eleanor said, bewildered, and didn't even immediately realize that for the first time his name had caused her not irritation, but joy. She listened to herself in astonishment and asked, "And who even allowed him to fix anything here?" "Oh, come now, Ellie. Cyril has golden hands. He's already fixed half the breakdowns in the carriage. He repaired the boiler, several outlets. The conductor can't praise him enough. She even gave him a bottle of liqueur. And he told us that he'll finish his business and come to us with that bottle. So, Ellie, you should also get dressed up because he's so—" And Agnes blushed lyrically and shyly. Johnson came, and not alone, but with his neighbor, the same intellectual-looking man who was boarding with the crossword puzzle magazine. "Well, Cyril," the man said, holding the compartment door, "how skillfully you do everything. It's simply amazing. Truly a master. And I, frankly, at first thought you were some kind of scientist. You won't believe it," he turned to the ladies. "I considered myself an experienced crossword solver, but compared to Cyril, I'm nothing. He just knows everything. For example, do any of you know which admiral sank the Turkish fleet in the Battle of Chesma? And which Russian literary classic discovered 20 new species of butterflies? And what is the unit of measurement for odor intensity? No, well, I either don't know or don't remember. But he knows. All the answers to all the questions," the man laughed. "Just some kind of magician." "Oh, come on, Simon," Cyril chuckled, checking the repaired lock. "Well, I know a few things. Some things you can just think about and guess, even if you don't know." "For example?" the people present asked, keenly interested. "Well, for example, this question. Which living creature has its brain located farthest from its heart?" Well, interesting. And which one?" Agnes Miller and Brenda clapped their hands. "Well, think about it. Estimate the distance. Figure it out. There's something to keep you busy. It'll last you halfway." Cyril smiled. "Oh, come on, Cyril. We'll never guess." "No, you tell us," the women worried. "We'll just torment ourselves. Please tell us." "A giraffe," Eleanor suddenly said quietly. "A giraffe's brain is farthest from its heart." Cyril looked at her and nodded silently, barely perceptibly. And the minutes, the hours, flew by with such speed that she didn't even notice how the journey, which had seemed unbearable and endless, came to an end. And now she dreaded the train's final stop, the last look at him, the last touch of that strong yet gentle hand with traces of machine oil ingrained forever in the skin. After saying goodbye to everyone, Cyril suddenly turned, quickly walked up to her, and slipped a piece of paper into her hand. "Ms. Eleanor, Ellie, perhaps we will never see each other again, but just promise me one thing. If you need help, if you need me, just call me. I will do anything for you." He looked at her intently, honestly, and desperately, and she saw recognition in those eyes. His recognition of something for which words were not needed. Cyril picked up his bag and quickly walked towards the carriage exit. "Oh, Ellie, forgive me, of course," she heard Agnes Miller's voice. "We certainly will never see each other again. And this is what I'll tell you, dear. You, Ellie, are a silly girl, that is, forgive me again, just a fool. He loves you, and you love him. It's clear even to a half-blind old woman like me. Ah, Ellie, well, giraffes are alive." When Arthur spoke about her worthless family life before sending Eleanor on her business trip, he himself didn't suspect how close he was to the truth. That life, that family, and everything else had long since ceased to exist for her. She and David had lived together for almost 8 years and never understood why those years were necessary. And it had never been so hard to return to her apartment as it was after those weeks at the factory and 2 amazing days on the train. Eleanor, I've filed for divorce, she heard from David as soon as she crossed the threshold. Ellie, I know you'll be unhappy. It's all somehow unexpected, undignified perhaps. I don't know, but I think you're the only good one. Thank you. I've never been so grateful to you in all these years. Thank you. Eleanor grabbed her stunned and frightened husband, or rather, ex-husband, by the hand and shook it. She rushed out of the apartment, despite all of David's attempts to explain something about court, property division, apartment documents, some other nonsense that was completely unnecessary to her now. She wanted only one thing: to dial the number written on the piece of paper and hear his voice say her name, slightly twisting it in a simple manner. Eleanor. And he answered so quickly that the first ring hadn't even finished, as if he had been waiting for her call continuously. They sat on a comfortable bench under an old maple tree, which was already noticeably highlighted with autumn colors. You know, Cy, she said, feeling his warmth, tenderness, and strength, sensing it with every cell of her body and melting with happiness, such simple and easy happiness. It's amazing, because then, well, when we ended up on the same train, at first I thought I just hated you, didn't I? And now, after just a few days, I don't understand how I could have lived without you for so many years. Unthinkable. Well, what's so unclear and amazing about that, Ellie? You know the saying, from love to hate is but a step. And who said the path from hate to love is longer?